The chains around my wrists were cold, but my mind was colder. I stood in the center of a massive hall built from black glass and silver light, surrounded by creatures who had never lost a war in 1,000 years, and they had never met someone like me. My name is Ethan Cole. 3 days ago, I was a soldier on a supply run near the edge of human space. Now I was a prisoner on a ship larger than any city I had ever seen, standing before the most powerful family in the known galaxy. The princess sat above me, on a throne made of light. Her name was Illyra Vashon, heir to the Vantor Empire, a nation that had conquered 11 star systems without losing a single major battle. She looked down at me the way someone looks down at an insect they find mildly interesting. "So this is a human," she said, her voice smooth and amused. I expected something taller. The room filled with soft laughter. Nobles in shining robes leaned toward each other, whispering. I did not move. I did not speak. I kept my eyes forward, my breathing steady, my face calm. "Nothing to say?" Illyra asked, tilting her head. "I was told your kind loved to talk, to argue, to beg." I said nothing. She stood from her throne and walked down the steps toward me, her long robe trailing behind her like liquid starlight. Guards on either side of me tensed, but she raised a hand and they stepped back. She circled me slowly, studying me like a scientist studying a strange rock. "Your species has no shields," she said, "no psychic bonds, no long lives. You die in 100 years if disease or war does not take you first. And yet here you are, captured trying to defend a supply route with 3 broken-down ships." She smiled. "Tell me, soldier, was it worth it?" I stayed silent. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something sharper, more curious. "You do not fear me." That was not true. Fear was there, quiet and cold in my stomach. But fear and silence are not enemies. Fear can live behind a locked door, and silence is simply refusing to open it. "Interesting," she murmured, more to herself than to me. She turned to the crowd of nobles. They said humans were simple animals who could be broken with words alone. Yet here is one who refuses to even flinch. A tall noble with silver skin and sharp eyes stepped forward. His name, I would later learn, was Lord Threk, an advisor to the royal family and a man who hated anything he could not control. "Perhaps he does not understand our language, Your Highness. Perhaps his mind is too small to process an insult." More laughter. I did not react. Inside, I was running numbers, counting guards, counting exits, counting how many seconds it would take to reach the nearest doorway if things changed. This was not defiance for the sake of pride. This was training. In the field, silence often decided who lived and who did not. I had learned that lesson long before I ever stepped onto this ship. Illyra studied my face for a long moment, searching for something. A crack, a flicker of anger. She found nothing. "Very well," she said. "If he will not speak, he will not need comfort either." She turned to the guards. "Take him to the lower decks. Let him sit with the others we've collected. Perhaps their tears will finally teach him what fear looks like." The guards grabbed my arms and pulled me toward a side door. As I was dragged away, I glanced back once. Illyra was still watching me, arms crossed, that same unreadable look in her eyes. Not the sneer she wore for the crowd, but something quieter, something almost like a question she had not yet found the words for. The lower decks were nothing like the golden hall above. Here, the walls were plain metal, streaked with rust and old stains. The air smelled like recycled oxygen and unwashed bodies. Cages lined both sides of a narrow corridor, each one holding creatures from worlds I had never heard of. Some had scales, some had too many eyes, some looked almost human, except for small details, a second row of teeth, skin that shimmered faintly under the dim lights. The guards threw me into an empty cell and sealed the door with a hiss. I sat on the cold floor and finally let out a slow breath. "You did not speak to her," said a voice from the cell beside mine. I turned and saw a creature with deep blue skin and large amber eyes staring at me through the bars that separated our cells. His voice was calm, almost thoughtful. "Most creatures beg," he continued. "Even the proud ones. The princess enjoys watching pride break. You gave her nothing to enjoy." "Would it have helped if I did?" I asked. The creature tilted his head, considering the question seriously. "No. But it would have been what she expected. You surprised her instead. That is rare on this ship." "My name is Ethan," I said. "Kale," he replied, "of the Doran colonies, captured 6 months ago when our trading station refused to pay tribute to the Empire." I looked around at the other cells. A small group of creatures with feathered skin sat together near the far wall, watching me with wide, careful eyes. Another cell held a single occupant, a tall being wrapped in tattered cloth, who never looked up from the floor. "How many prisoners are here?" I asked. "More than you would think," Kale said. "The Empire takes more than it needs. Slaves for labor, curiosities for the court, warnings for anyone who resists." He paused. "Your kind is new. We had heard stories, but none of us had seen a human before today." "What kind of stories?" Kale's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, something like interest crossed his face. "Stories that your species should not exist by now. That you have fought wars against each other for thousands of years and somehow never destroyed yourselves completely. That despite having no shields, no long lives, and no psychic gifts, you continue expanding into space anyway, as if none of that matters to you." I almost smiled. "It matters. We just don't let it stop us." "The princess believes patience is a weakness," Kale said quietly. "She believes only strength that can be shown. Power, magic, size, matters. She has never met a species that treats patience itself as a weapon." I leaned back against the cold wall of my cell, letting his words settle in my mind. Around me, the sounds of the lower decks continued. Distant footsteps, the hum of old machinery, the occasional whisper between prisoners in languages I did not understand. But for the first time since my capture, I felt something other than fear. I felt calm. Because if there was one thing years of training had taught me, it was this: the moment someone underestimates you, they hand you an advantage they cannot take back. Illyra Vashin had looked at me and seen weakness. She had seen a soldier who refused to speak, refused to beg, refused to break, and she had mistaken silence for surrender. She had no idea what silence actually was. It was not surrender. It was observation. It was patience. It was the quiet space between one move and the next, where a soldier studies the board before making a decision that changes everything. I closed my eyes and listened to the ship around me, the distant vibration of engines, the faint pulse of power running through the walls, the soft murmurs of prisoners from a dozen different worlds. Somewhere above me, in a hall made of light and glass, a princess who had never lost a battle sat on her throne, already forgetting the quiet human soldier she had dismissed only hours before. She would remember me soon enough. I did not know yet how, or when, or what it would cost. But I knew this. Every empire that had ever underestimated a quiet enemy had eventually paid for that mistake. History on Earth was full of such stories. Wars won not by the loudest army, but by the one willing to wait, watch, and strike only when the moment was right. I opened my eyes and looked at Kale through the bars. "Tell me about this empire," I said. "Everything you know." Kale's amber eyes studied me for a long moment, as if deciding something important. Then, slowly, he began to speak. And I listened to every word. Kale spoke for a long time, and I listened without interrupting once. He told me the Vantor Empire had ruled for over 1,000 years, built on the back of a single advantage, a rare psychic bond called the Threadlink, passed down only through royal bloodlines. Those born with the Threadlink could sense danger before it arrived, coordinate fleets across great distances without delay, and read the surface thoughts of anyone standing close to them. It was this gift that made the royal family untouchable, and it was this gift that made every other species in the empire bow without question. "But the gift has a price," Kale said, lowering his voice even though no guard stood near us. "The Threadlink only grows stronger with practice, discipline, and calm. It weakens under sudden shock, chaos, or things it cannot predict. The royal family has never needed patience because their gift always warns them in advance. They have forgotten how to face the unexpected. I turned this piece of information over in my mind carefully. If true, it meant the Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest blind spot. A power built on prediction would struggle against anything unpredictable. How many worlds pay tribute to the throne? I asked. 43, by last count, Kale answered. Though not all pay willingly, the outer colonies grow restless. Taxes rise every cycle, while the royal court spends its wealth on festivals and monuments. My own people stopped receiving fair trade agreements 3 years ago. That is why we were taken, for refusing to accept new terms without protest. Across the corridor, one of the feathered creatures shifted closer to the bars of her cell, listening. She had sharp eyes and quiet movements, like someone who had learned to survive by staying unseen. "You should be careful what you say to him," she said to Kale, her voice soft but firm. "He is human. We know nothing about humans, except that the court finds them amusing." "My name is Ethan," I said, turning toward her. "I am not here to cause you trouble. I only want to understand where I am." She studied me for a long moment before answering. "Dara," she said, "of the Faerun colonies. My people build ships for the Empire's fleet, ships we are never allowed to fly ourselves." "How long have you been here?" I asked. 2 years, Dara said quietly. "Long enough to learn the patterns of the guards, the schedule of the ship, and the names of every noble who visits these decks looking for entertainment." She paused. "Long enough to know that hope is dangerous here. It is easier to survive without it." I did not answer right away. I understood her caution. Hope, when crushed too many times, becomes a wound rather than a comfort. But I also understood something she did not yet know about humans. "Where I come from," I said carefully, "hope is not something we wait for. It is something we build, piece by piece, even when the odds are bad, especially when the odds are bad." Dara's eyes flickered with something unreadable, not quite belief, but not quite disbelief either. Kale watched the exchange silently, his amber eyes thoughtful. Over the following hours, more prisoners gathered near the bars separating our cells, drawn by quiet curiosity about the strange new creature who had refused to speak in front of the princess. Word had apparently traveled fast through the lower decks. A being named Orin, thin and pale with long fingers built for delicate machine work, asked me directly why I had stayed silent before the royal court. "Because speaking would have given her what she wanted," I answered. "A reaction, information, a weakness to use later. Silence gave her nothing." "But it also gave you nothing," Orin pointed out. "No answers, no mercy, no advantage." I shook my head slowly. "It gave me time, and time is worth more than people realize, especially against an enemy who has never had to wait for anything in her life." The prisoners exchanged glances, and for the first time since my arrival, I noticed something shift in the air around us. Not hope exactly, not yet, but attention. Interest. The lower decks of that ship had likely not heard a new idea in a very long time. I spent the next several hours asking careful questions, mapping out everything I could learn. I learned the guard rotations changed every 8 hours, and the newest guards were always less experienced, more likely to make mistakes near the end of their shift. I learned the ship traveled along a fixed patrol route between 3 border systems, meaning its location could be predicted if someone knew the pattern. I learned that food rations were distributed by a small transport drone that followed the same path through the corridor every single day, a detail no one else seemed to think was important, but which told me exactly how the guards monitored movement between cells. None of this information would help me escape immediately. I was still chained, still trapped, still surrounded by an empire vastly more powerful than anything my own people commanded. But information was never useless. It simply waited for the right moment to become useful. Late into what the ship called its rest cycle, when the corridor lights dimmed and most of the prisoners had gone quiet, Kale spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are not like the others they have brought here," he said, Most arrive broken, or they break shortly after. You arrived calm, and you have grown calmer since. I was trained for situations like this, I admitted. Not this exact situation, obviously. No one trains for alien princesses and glass thrones. But the core of it is the same. Stay calm. Watch everything. Wait for the moment that matters, and do not waste your strength on moments that do not. And what happens when that moment comes? Kale asked. What will you do? I looked at the dim lights above us, tracing invisible patterns in my mind. Patrol routes, guard schedules, the layout of the ship as I understood it so far. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I will know it when I see it. That is usually how it works. Kale did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a weight I had not heard from him before. There are others like you, elsewhere in the Empire, prisoners from your world. I have heard rumors, nothing confirmed, but rumors nonetheless, of a network among captured humans, small acts of resistance, quiet sabotage, messages passed along supply routes. If such a network exists, and if you are truly one of them, the princess may have made a very large mistake bringing you onto her personal ship. A slow, careful feeling settled in my chest. Not excitement exactly, but something close to it. Recognition, perhaps. The idea that I was not alone in this, that somewhere across this vast and arrogant empire, other soldiers like me were doing exactly what I intended to do here. Watching, waiting, learning. Tell me more about these rumors, I said quietly. Kale shook his head slowly. I know little beyond what I have already shared. Whispers travel strangely in a place like this, distorted by fear, exaggerated by hope. I cannot promise any of it is true. It does not need to be entirely true, I said. It only needs to be possible. Possibility is enough to plan around. The rest cycle continued around us, quiet and dim, broken only by the occasional hum of distant machinery. I sat with my back against the cold wall of my cell, turning every piece of information over in my mind, testing how each detail might connect to another, searching for patterns the way I had been trained to search for patterns on countless missions before this one. The guard rotations, the transport drone's fixed path, the thread link's weakness against sudden, unpredictable events, the restless outer colonies straining under years of unfair tribute, the rumors of scattered human prisoners quietly resisting across the Empire's reach. None of it formed a complete picture yet, but pieces were beginning to fit together, slowly, carefully, the way any real plan must be built, not through sudden brilliance or desperate gambles, but through patience, observation, and the willingness to wait for the exact right moment before acting. Somewhere above these lower decks, Princess Alira Vashin was likely already forgetting about the silent human soldier she had dismissed so easily. She had returned to her throne of light, surrounded by nobles who laughed at her every word, secure in an empire that had never truly been tested. She had no way of knowing that the very silence she had mocked was, in that exact moment, quietly becoming the first thread in a plan that would eventually reach her personal ship, her royal bloodline, and the empire she believed could never be shaken. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the ship settle around me like a familiar rhythm. Sleep would not come easily, not with so many thoughts still forming, but rest was still necessary. Whatever moment I was waiting for, I would need to be ready when it finally arrived. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty had begun to take root. That moment was coming. I only needed to be patient a little longer. 3 days passed before the guards came for me again. I counted them carefully, marking each rest cycle as it ended, each meal as it arrived on schedule, with the transport drone gliding silently down the corridor. When the cell door finally hissed open, 2 guards stood waiting, their armor polished and their expressions unreadable. "The princess requests your presence," one of them said. "There is to be a trial." Kale's eyes met mine through the bars as I was pulled to my feet. "Be careful," he said quietly. "A trial on this ship rarely means a fair contest. It means entertainment for the court, dressed in the language of honor." I nodded once, filing his warning away. and let the guards lead me back through the corridors I had memorized during my time in the lower decks. We passed through wide hallways lined with tall windows showing endless stars outside, then through a set of grand doors into a massive open chamber I had not seen before. Unlike the throne hall, this room had a wide circular floor made of dark metal, surrounded by rows of seating that rose upward like an arena. Nobles filled the seats, murmuring excitedly among themselves. At the highest point of the arena sat Princess Illyra Vashon, dressed in a different robe than before, sharper, more formal, the kind of clothing worn for events meant to be remembered. "Ethan Cole," she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber. "Word has reached me that you have spent 3 days speaking with the other prisoners, gathering knowledge as if you intend to do something with it." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I find that curious for someone with no weapons, no allies, and no way to leave this ship." I said nothing, standing at the center of the arena floor. "Since you seem to enjoy silence so much," Illyra continued, "I thought I would offer you a chance to prove that silence carries strength, not simply the absence of fear." She gestured toward a section of the arena wall, which slid open to reveal a single, tall figure stepping forward. Broad shoulders, gray-plated skin, and eyes that held no visible emotion at all. "This is Vorn, a champion of my personal guard. He has faced 12 challengers in this arena and has never lost. If you can last against him for even a short time, I will consider your silence something more than simple stubbornness." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lord Threk, seated near the princess, leaned forward with obvious anticipation, clearly hoping to see the strange, silent human broken in front of the entire court. I studied Vorn carefully as he stepped into the arena. His movements were slow and deliberate, built for overwhelming strength rather than speed. His armor was thick across his chest and shoulders, but lighter around the joints, likely to allow greater flexibility despite his size. I noted the way he planted his feet firmly with each step, a fighter trained to absorb impact rather than avoid it entirely. "You may still refuse to speak," Illyra said, almost gently, though her eyes betrayed genuine curiosity now, rather than simple mockery. "But you cannot refuse to fight, not here." I looked around the arena floor, searching for anything useful. A single item rested near the edge of the circle, a long metal staff, clearly provided as the only weapon I would be allowed. I picked it up slowly, testing its weight, feeling the balance shift in my hands. Vorn did not wait for any announcement. He moved forward immediately, faster than his size suggested, closing the distance between us in only a few long strides. I stepped aside at the last possible moment, letting his first strike pass harmlessly through empty air, then used the staff to redirect his momentum rather than block it directly. He stumbled slightly, more from surprise than actual loss of balance, and turned to face me again with narrowed eyes. The crowd fell quiet, clearly expecting the fight to end quickly in my favor being crushed. Instead, I circled slowly, staying just outside his reach, studying the rhythm of his movements. He struck again, a heavy overhead blow that would have ended the match immediately if it had landed. I sidestepped and let the staff glance off his shoulder rather than meet his strike directly, absorbing only part of the impact while conserving my own strength. This was not a fight I could win through raw power. Vorn was larger, stronger, and clearly more experienced in direct combat than I was. But strength was never the only factor that decided an outcome. I had learned that lesson long before stepping onto this ship, in training exercises that lasted for days, in missions where the enemy outnumbered us badly, in situations where the only advantage available was patience and careful observation. Vorn attacked again and again, each strike heavier than the last, each miss slightly widening the gap in his own defense as frustration began to creep into his movements. The champion of the Royal Guard, accustomed to quick victories, had never faced an opponent who refused to simply stand and trade blows. I noticed it then, a small pause in his stance whenever he prepared his heaviest strikes, a brief moment where his weight shifted fully onto his back leg before launching forward. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but after avoiding several of his attacks, the pattern became clear. The next time he shifted his weight for another heavy strike, I moved first instead of waiting to react. I stepped inside his reach rather than away from it, closing the distance he needed for his attack to land properly. The staff came up sharply, catching his extended arm at the elbow, disrupting the strike entirely before it could gather any real force. Vorn stumbled forward, off balance for the first time in the match, and I used the opening to sweep the staff low, catching his legs and sending him down onto the arena floor. Silence spread through the chamber, the kind of silence that comes from genuine shock rather than polite attention. Vorn pushed himself up quickly, clearly more embarrassed than injured, but the moment had already happened. The champion of the Royal Guard had been knocked down by a creature the entire court had dismissed as weak. I did not press the advantage further. I stepped back, lowering the staff, and waited. Alira rose slowly from her seat, her expression unreadable in a way I had not seen before. Gone was the amused mockery from our first meeting. In its place was something sharper, more focused, the look of someone recalculating an assumption they had believed was settled fact. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet arena. "The trial is concluded." Vorn stood fully, brushing dust from his armor, his expression a mixture of confusion and grudging respect as he looked at me. He said nothing, but gave a small, deliberate nod before stepping back through the arena wall where he had entered. Alira descended from her seat, walking slowly down toward the arena floor, ignoring the murmurs rising among the assembled nobles. She stopped a short distance from me, studying my face the same way she had studied it during our first meeting, except now the curiosity had deepened into something closer to genuine interest. "You did not fight to win," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You fought to understand him first." I remained silent, though this time my silence felt different, not simply restraint, but something closer to quiet confidence. 12 challengers have faced Vorn in this arena, Alira continued. None of them lasted as long as you did. None of them thought to study him, instead of simply attacking. She tilted her head slightly. Your species truly has no shields, no enhanced strength, no psychic gifts of any kind, and yet you stood against my finest guard, using nothing but patience and observation. Lord Threk rose from his seat near the top of the arena, his expression tight with something close to alarm. Your Highness, this proves nothing. A single fortunate outcome does not. Enough, Threk, Alira said sharply, without turning to look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on me. I have watched this human for 3 days without realizing it. His silence in my court, his questions among the prisoners, his refusal to panic even now, standing in an arena designed specifically to break him. She paused. I begin to wonder if I misunderstood something important when I first mocked him. I finally spoke, my voice steady and calm after days of careful silence. You mistook patience for weakness, I said. It is a mistake your empire has likely made before, with other species, other worlds. Perhaps that mistake is worth examining more carefully than a single arena match. The chamber fell utterly silent at the sound of my voice, the first words the entire court had heard from me since my capture. Alira studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes that I could not fully read yet. Take him back to the lower decks, she finally said to the guards, though her voice had lost its earlier sharpness. But see that he receives proper food and rest. I find myself wishing to speak with him again, under different circumstances. As the guards led me away, I glanced back once more. Alira remained standing at the edge of the arena floor, watching me with an expression no longer built from mockery or amusement, but from something closer to genuine, careful curiosity. The silence I had carried since my first day on this ship had finally begun to speak for itself. News of the arena traveled faster through the ship than I expected. By the time the guards returned me to the lower decks, prisoners in nearby cells were already whispering about what had happened, passing the story from cell to cell in hushed, excited voices. Kale watched me approach with an expression I had not seen on him before, something between relief and quiet astonishment. "You defeated Vorn," he said, not quite a question. "I didn't defeat him," I said, sitting down against the familiar cold wall of my cell. "I lasted longer than expected and caught him off guard once. That is not the same as winning." "It is enough," Kale replied. "No one on this ship has ever seen the princess's champion knocked down. Word will spread beyond these decks, beyond this ship, beyond this system." He paused. "The Empire runs on the belief that it cannot be surprised. You have just proven that belief false in front of witnesses who cannot simply be silenced." Dara approached the bars separating our cells as well, her sharp eyes studying me with newfound attention. "The guards spoke of it while bringing food," she said quietly. "They seemed unsettled, uncertain how to explain what they saw to the others still on duty." I said little in response, though inwardly I understood the weight of what Kale was suggesting. An empire built on the assumption of total control could not easily explain away a single unexpected defeat. Even a small crack, left unaddressed, had the potential to widen over time. Over the following days, the atmosphere in the lower decks shifted in small but noticeable ways. Guards who once barely acknowledged the prisoners now watched me with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Food arrived slightly more generously than before. Conversations among prisoners grew bolder, no longer limited to careful whispers, but occasionally rising into open discussion. It was during one of these quieter periods that Oren, the thin, pale prisoner with delicate hands built for machine work, approached the bars separating our cells with something clutched carefully in his grip. "I overheard the guards discussing a transmission," he said quietly. "Something intercepted from beyond the border systems. A human signal, encrypted, repeating on a pattern the Empire's systems could not immediately decode." I sat up straighter, my full attention now fixed on him. "What kind of signal?" "I do not know the details," Oren admitted. "Only that it caused unusual concern among the ship's communication officers. They spoke of it as if it were not the first such signal they had encountered." He hesitated. "There are whispers, Ethan, that other humans exist within the Empire's reach, quietly resisting in ways the court has not yet fully understood." This matched what Kale had mentioned days earlier, rumors of scattered resistance among captured humans across the Empire. Hearing it confirmed, even indirectly, sent a slow, careful current of purpose through me. I was not simply a lone prisoner waiting for an opportunity. Somewhere, others like me were already active, already testing the edges of an empire that had never faced coordinated, patient resistance before. 3 days after the arena trial, the guards returned once more, though this time their manner was different, less rigid, almost hesitant. "The princess requests your presence," one said. "Alone, no court, no audience." I rose without hesitation, exchanging a brief glance with Kale before following the guards through the familiar corridors. This time, instead of the throne hall or the arena, I was led to a smaller chamber near the upper decks, quiet and private, with wide windows overlooking the endless stars outside. Alira Vashan stood near the window when I entered, her back turned, her robe far simpler than the ones I had seen her wear before. The guards withdrew after escorting me inside, leaving the two of us alone in the quiet room. "You may sit," she said, without turning around. "Or stand, if silence remains your preference." I remained standing, watching her carefully. "I have spent the last several days reconsidering many things," Illyra said finally, turning to face me. Her expression held none of the mockery from our first meeting, replaced instead by something quieter, more thoughtful. "My empire has ruled without serious challenge for over 1,000 years. We have grown accustomed to certainty, to knowing, through the thread link, what dangers approach before they arrive." She paused. "You are the first thing in a very long time that the thread link did not warn me about." "Because I am not a danger the way your empire understands danger," I said quietly. "I carry no weapon your systems would recognize as threatening, no hidden power, no secret strength waiting to be revealed. And yet you defeated my finest guard," Illyra said. "I studied him," I replied. "I watched how he moved, how he shifted his weight before each strike, how his confidence made him predictable in ways he never noticed. That is not a hidden power, princess. It is simply patience, applied carefully. Illyra studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. Patience, she repeated softly, as if testing the word for the first time. My people do not value patience. We value certainty, preparation through foresight, not through waiting. Foresight only works against dangers you can predict, I said. What happens when something arrives that your gift cannot see coming? Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with genuine consideration. Is that a threat, soldier? It is an observation, I said. Your empire has ruled 43 worlds through strength that has never truly been tested by anything unexpected. But empires that rely entirely on foresight eventually meet a moment their foresight cannot prepare them for. History on my own world is full of such moments. Great powers that assumed their strength alone would always be enough, until the day it was not. Illyra walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the vast field of stars stretching endlessly beyond the ship. You speak as though you already know how this ends, she said quietly. I don't, I admitted. No one does. Not truly. But I know this. Somewhere in your empire, worlds that pay tribute unwillingly are growing restless. I have heard it from prisoners in your own lower decks, worlds where trade has grown unfair, where taxes rise while your court spends its wealth on festivals few outside the palace ever benefit from. I paused, watching her reaction carefully. And somewhere beyond your border systems, my own people are already active. Quiet resistance, encrypted signals your officers cannot yet decode, small acts building towards something larger. Illyra turned back to face me fully now, her expression sharp with genuine surprise. You know of the signals. I know they exist, I said. I do not know their full purpose, but I suspect your empire has already noticed enough to feel uneasy about them. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet hum of the ship filled the silence between us, along with the distant, endless light of stars outside the window. Why tell me this? Illyra finally asked, when silence has served you so well until now. Because silence was never meant to last forever, I said. It was a tool, used until the moment it stopped being useful. That moment has arrived. I held her gaze steadily. Your empire mocked my species for having no shields, no long lives, no psychic gifts. But you never asked what we do have instead. Patience that outlasts any single lifetime. A willingness to build towards something slowly, even when the odds seem impossible. A refusal to accept that strength alone decides every outcome. Illyra was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something closer to genuine respect than curiosity. You believe your species could challenge an empire that has stood for 1,000 years. I believe every empire that has ever assumed it could not be challenged has eventually been proven wrong, I said carefully. I am not here to threaten you, princess. I am telling you this because you asked, and because I believe understanding an opponent honestly serves you better than underestimating them ever will. She studied me for a long time after that, the silence between us no longer sharp or hostile, but thoughtful, weighing something carefully. Finally she spoke again, her voice quieter than before. You are the strangest prisoner this ship has ever held, Ethan Cole. Perhaps, I said, or perhaps I am simply the first one your empire has truly listened to. Illyra's eyes lingered on me a moment longer before she turned back toward the window, her expression distant, thoughtful, clearly turning over everything I had said. Return him to the lower decks, she said quietly to the guards waiting outside the chamber door, but ensure his conditions improve, and inform me immediately if anything further develops regarding those signals. As the guards led me away, I glanced back one final time. Illyra remained standing near the window, watching the stars with an expression no longer built from certainty, but from something far more valuable to someone in my position: doubt. For the first time since my capture, I felt the careful pieces of a much larger plan beginning to align, not through force, not through sudden brilliance, but through the same quiet patience that had carried me through every difficult moment since stepping onto this ship. The Empire believed itself untouchable. But doubt, once planted carefully in the mind of someone as powerful as Elira Vashan, had a way of growing far larger than anyone expected. 5 days after my private conversation with Elira Vashan, the ship's alarms tore through the quiet rhythm of the lower decks. Red light pulsed along the corridor walls, and the distant hum of engines shifted into something sharper, more urgent. Kale sat up immediately, his amber eyes wide with alertness. "That is not a drill," he said. "I have never heard that alarm before." Guards rushed past the cells, their movements far less disciplined than usual, shouting instructions to each other in clipped, worried tones. Through fragments of their conversation, I caught pieces of what was happening, unknown vessels approaching from multiple directions, communication disruptions along the border systems, reports of unrest among several tribute worlds, all occurring at nearly the same moment. "It's happening," Orin whispered from his cell, his delicate fingers gripping the bars tightly. "The signals you spoke of, the resistance." I rose to my feet, my heart steady despite the chaos rippling through the ship around us. This was the moment I had been quietly waiting for since my capture, though I had not known its exact shape until now. Whatever was unfolding beyond these walls, it was clearly larger than a single skirmish. Minutes later, the guards returned to my cell, their expressions tight with tension rather than the usual detached authority. "The princess requires your presence immediately," one said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. I followed them without hesitation, moving quickly through corridors that had grown chaotic with activity. Nobles who once strolled these halls with lazy confidence now moved briskly, whispering urgently among themselves. When I reached the private chamber where Elira had spoken with me days earlier, I found her standing near a wide display of shifting lights and symbols, her expression far more serious than I had ever seen it. "3 tribute worlds have declared open rebellion within the last hour," she said without turning around. "Communication has been disrupted across 2 border systems, and an unidentified fleet, small but coordinated, has entered restricted space near this very ship." She finally turned to face me, her eyes sharp with something between anger and genuine unease. "Explain what you know." "I know only what I told you before," I said honestly. "That your empire's tribute worlds have grown restless, and that human resistance has been active somewhere within your reach. I do not control either of those forces, Princess. I am a single soldier, not a general commanding fleets from a prison cell." "And yet you predicted this," Elira said, her voice tight, "days before it began." "I predicted a pattern," I said calmly, "not this specific moment. Empires that ignore internal unrest long enough eventually face consequences they did not plan for. I did not know when. I only knew it was likely, given everything I had learned since arriving here." Before Elira could respond further, an officer rushed into the chamber, bowing quickly despite his obvious urgency. "Your Highness, the unidentified fleet has made contact. They are demanding the immediate release of all prisoners aboard this vessel, specifically naming the human currently in our custody." Elira's eyes shifted to me sharply. "They know you are here." "It seems they do," I said, though inwardly a careful, steady calm settled through me. Whatever network Kale had mentioned days earlier, whatever quiet resistance had been building across the Empire's reach, it had apparently traced my location with enough precision to act directly. "This could be a trap," Lord Threck said, entering the chamber behind the officer, his expression tight with suspicion. "A small fleet cannot threaten a vessel of this size. This is likely a distraction, meant to draw our attention while the true assault occurs elsewhere." "Or it is exactly what it appears to be," I said quietly. "A rescue attempt, coordinated with the unrest occurring simultaneously across your tribute worlds. Either way, Princess, you now face a choice that foresight alone cannot resolve for you. The thread link warns you of danger it recognizes. It cannot advise you on a situation it has never encountered before." Elira studied me for a long moment, her expression caught between anger at the situation and something closer to reluctant respect for the accuracy of my earlier warning. "What would you do in my position?" she finally asked. The question surprised me, though I did not let it show. "I would consider what continuing this conflict actually gains you," I said carefully. "Your empire has ruled through strength that assumed it would never be tested. That assumption has now been broken, publicly, in front of witnesses who will carry the story to every corner of your territory, regardless of what happens next. Continuing to fight here, in this moment, only proves that your empire responds to uncertainty with force, rather than adaptation. And releasing you proves what, exactly?" Threk snapped. "That we can be threatened into surrender?" "It proves nothing of the kind," I said, turning to face him directly. "It proves that an empire capable of ruling 43 worlds is also capable of recognizing when continued conflict serves no one's interest. Strength is not only measured by what you are willing to destroy, sometimes it is measured by what you are wise enough to release." 100. The chamber fell silent, broken only by the distant hum of alarms still echoing through the ship. Illyra turned away from both of us, walking slowly toward the wide display still shifting with symbols and lights representing the unfolding crisis across her empire's border. "Bring me a direct channel to the fleet outside," she finally said to the waiting officer. "I wish to speak with them myself." Within minutes, a small holographic display flickered to life above the chamber's central console, showing the calm, steady face of a woman I did not recognize, though her uniform bore markings I knew instantly. Human military insignia, worn and practical rather than ceremonial. "This is Colonel Grant," the woman said, her voice steady, despite the tension clearly present in her expression. "We have reason to believe you hold one of our soldiers aboard your vessel. We are prepared to negotiate his release through peaceful means, provided our terms are met." Illyra studied the holographic image carefully. "Your fleet is significantly outmatched, Colonel. A show of force here accomplishes little beyond risking further conflict." "We are not here to force anything," Colonel Grant replied calmly. "We are here because a network of quiet resistance across your empire's reach has grown tired of silence being mistaken for weakness. Your tribute worlds are rising, not because we commanded them to, but because years of unfair treatment finally reached a breaking point that coincided with our arrival. We simply offered them the chance to act at a moment when your empire's attention was already divided." Illyra's eyes flicked briefly toward me, understanding settling clearly across her expression now. This had never been a single rescue mission. It had been a coordinated moment, carefully timed to align resistance across multiple fronts at once, using the very unrest I had warned her about days earlier. "You planned this before your soldier was even captured," Illyra said slowly. "We planned for opportunities," Colonel Grant corrected. "Ethan Cole's capture simply became one of several converging factors that made this moment possible. Humans have learned patience does not mean waiting idly. It means preparing carefully until the right moment reveals itself." Illyra was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between the holographic image of Colonel Grant and myself, standing calmly nearby. Finally, she straightened, her expression settling into something calm and deliberate, the look of someone who had made a difficult decision. "Release the prisoners," she said to the officer standing nearby. "All of them, human and otherwise. Prepare a shuttle for immediate departure." Threk stepped forward immediately, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Your Highness, this is a decision I have made," Illyra said firmly, cutting him off without raising her voice. "My empire has ruled through certainty for 1,000 years. Perhaps it is time we learn to rule through wisdom instead." She turned to face me directly one final time. "You spoke of patience as a weapon, Ethan Cole. I believe I finally understand what you meant." Within the hour, I stood in the same lower decks where I had spent days in careful conversation with Kale, Dara, and Oren, only now the cells stood open, guards standing aside rather than blocking the corridor. Kale approached me slowly, his amber eyes filled with quiet astonishment. "You did this," he said, "not through force, through patience alone. Through patience, and through people willing to act when the moment finally arrived," I corrected gently. This was never something I could have done by myself. Dara joined us as well, her sharp eyes softer now than they had been during our first conversation. "Where will you go now?" she asked. "Home, for now," I said, "but I suspect this will not be the last time our paths cross. Your worlds deserve fairness the Empire has failed to provide. That is a conversation worth continuing, long after today." As I made my way toward the waiting shuttle, guided by Colonel Grant's crew who had boarded briefly to confirm the prisoner release, I passed once more through the corridor, leading toward the upper decks. Illyra stood near a wide window, watching quietly as prisoners from a dozen different worlds boarded transports prepared for their return home. She turned as I approached, her expression calm now, thoughtful, entirely different from the amused mockery I had first encountered days earlier. "You never answered my very first question," she said quietly, "whether it was worth it, defending a supply route with broken-down ships against an empire like mine." I considered her question carefully before answering. "I believe it was," I said. "Not because of the battle itself, but because of everything that followed. Sometimes the smallest moments, a single soldier refusing to speak, a single choice to stay calm under pressure, become the beginning of something much larger than anyone could have predicted at the time." Illyra studied me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. "Perhaps I will see you again, soldier," she said finally, "under circumstances neither of us has yet imagined." "Perhaps," I agreed. "Empires change slowly, princess. But they do change, when someone is patient enough to wait for the right moment, and wise enough to recognize it when it finally arrives." I boarded the shuttle without looking back again, taking my place among prisoners from worlds I had never heard of before this journey began, each of them now heading toward homes they had feared they might never see again. As the shuttle pulled away from the massive vessel, I watched through a small window as the ship grew smaller against the endless field of stars. Somewhere aboard that ship, a princess who had mocked my silence now understood something her empire had forgotten across 1,000 years of unquestioned rule. That true strength was never only measured by what could be shown through power alone. Sometimes it was measured by patience, by quiet observation, and by the willingness to wait for a single, careful moment where everything could finally change. She had mocked a human soldier for staying silent. She would remember, for the rest of her long life, exactly why that silence had mattered more than anything she could have said in response.